Welcome to the Heart of Equity. My name is Ashley Rodgers. I am the host of the show, and today I have an amazing, incredible guest. His name is Vu Le. He is the founder, creator, rebel rouser, defender of the Oxford comma, and father of a unicorn of nonprofit AF.com. He's also the founder of community-centric fundraising. Welcome, Vu. We're so happy to have you here.
Hi, Ashley. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, of course. Okay. I just want to say that I have been a fangirl of yours for a very hot minute, myself and like everyone else at Health Leads, because I'm not gonna lie, when your blog post hits my email box, like I literally grab my teacup and I'm like sipping it the whole time. I'm like, ooh, what else is happening here? Like, what is he about to talk about? Because you are like, you do not hold your tongue. Like you say everything and you say all this the quiet parts out loud. And like I appreciate that. And so you're doing the Lord's work for like nonprofit folks, real talk. And so I want to ask you, what is your origin story? Like what motivated you to create nonprofitaf.com?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Ashley. I appreciate the kind words. Because of my rabble rousing, I get a lot of hate. So people are like, you're horrible, and lots of yeah. So I appreciate the encouragement. My origin story is that I was born in Vietnam,
Mhm.
and I spent some time over there, then moved over to the United States when I was 8 years old. I got a degree in psychology and social work, and have been in the nonprofit sector for a bit. And then a few years ago, a funder to my nonprofit asked me to write a blog post for their website about what it's like to be a nonprofit grantee of theirs.
Mhm.
And because of the power dynamics, I couldn't really say no, right? So I started writing, and I realized, I kind of like it. So then eventually it spun out into nonprofitaf.com, and that's what I've been doing now for the past about decade or so.
Wow, because I know you also wrote a book about it too. Like you compiled all your blog posts into one book that people can buy as well. It's like it's good. I mean, I'm sure you're getting hate on some outlets, but like all the other nonprofiters who don't have the power to speak up are all thankful for you just calling it out because you have a safe space to do that. And I wanted to talk about power dynamics because power is a really big deal with nonprofits and funders. Can you, and I know you've written about this as well, like, can you kind of explain to people what that power dynamic looks like currently in
Yeah,
like the nonprofit
absolutely.
sector?
Yeah. There's tons of power dynamics in the
Yeah.
sector, and it affects how we treat one another. And especially like between nonprofits and funders, this power dynamics is very salient, right?
Mhm.
Funders, foundations, donors, people with money, because they have money and they're giving it out, then they have this idea that nonprofits or people who are seeking funds should do what they say, right? And so there's this, and then nonprofits feel like we do have to do what they say. We have to follow their rules, their whims, and so on. And what happens is that a lot of these donors and funders, they get to dictate like what issues we nonprofits work on, how we go about applying for grants, what we can spend the money on, and oftentimes it's really negatively affecting our work, right? We spend a lot of time writing grants, for example, and kind of
Mhm.
sucking up to donors and funders, and then oftentimes they have no idea what they're talking about, but because we treat them like they do, then they're like, oh yeah, I'm an expert in homelessness now, because I gave you some money. I'm therefore an expert, and it's kind of terrible in the sector a bit.
And we're talking, so that is a big deal, right? Because you're talking about you give people are giving the money and everyone feels like they now they like know all the things because they gave a couple of thousand or $1 million. With that said, how can I want to say the little man, the nonprofiters, be able to push back against that? Like, what advice do you have for them to be able to like speak their truth and say like, actually, you're not the expert, we are, and like, let us do what we do.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of it is it's kind of our fault because we have
Mm,
these philosophies that we've internalized, right? We think, for example, that this is other people's money, and so therefore, when they give some of that money to us, we should be grateful and thankful. But the reality is that in the United States, at least, a lot of wealth in this country has been built on really inequitable means. And I think there's like five of them, and five main ones. One is like slavery, right?
yeah.
Stolen indigenous land, worker exploitation, environmental degradation, and tax avoidance. Of course, we can also talk about like uh, colonialism and imperialism and things as well.
Right.
But basically, a lot of wealth in this country have been built through these terrible things, and then people hoard all this money that they've made through inequitable means, and then
Mhm.
instead of paying like their taxes, they then create a family foundation, or they put into a donor advice fund, and
Yeah.
now they ask people. So I think one of the things that we need to do is like get out of this mindset that this is other people's money. I always kind of liken it to like if someone stole your bicycle, right? And then they're
Hmm.
like, if you apply for a grant and fill out this grant application, we'll give you back one of the handlebars, right? And then we're like, oh, yeah, thank you. That's so generous of you. We will fill out this application. When really we should be angrier and say, where the hell is the rest of my damn bicycle that you stole from me and my ancestors? And, stuff like that. So I think we need to get a lot angrier. Another philosophy is that this is other people's, no, I mean, there's only so much money to go around. So a lot of funders and donors be like, well, you have to play this Hunger Games that we created for you to get resources because there's only so much money to go around. That is also a lie. There's just tons of money just sitting in foundation endowments and donor advised funds and so on. Like over $1.5 trillion just sitting
With
there.
the T?
Yeah, with a T, just sitting
Damn.
there while everything is on fire and nonprofits are scrambling trying to put it out. So like this philosophy that there's only so much money to go around is total BS, and we need to just like stop believing in it. And then I think the other thing is like this idea that if you have money again that you're an expert, right? In any other field, like if the people with the least amount of knowledge
Yeah.
but the most amount of money determining the course of action, I think we call that corruption. Right, right.
Love
But
it.
right, right. But in this sector, if you give a bunch of money to a food bank, then somehow you're an expert now, and you can be like, "I don't want that money to be spent on your staff salary or, your rent or whatever." Like how is that okay? It's not okay.
It's not okay. I'm glad that you touched on like the scarcity mindset. I think as nonprofits, it's literally like we're fighting the Hunger Games and like not sharing things because we know we want to get that grant or what have you. So from like an internal perspective, from a nonprofit or like for nonprofit people, how can we avoid the scarcity mindset? Do you have advice on that?
Yeah, I mean, one is just to be aware of it, right?
Mhm.
And I mean, I think a lot of us are kind of proud of having this like scarcity mindset. It's like a badge of honor to sit on crappy chairs, And I feel people are bragging. It's like, oh, I haven't taken a vacation in years, or my chair is so terrible. It's causing me back problems, as if it's like a point of pride. And I think we need to get out of that. Right? I think there's this sort of martyrdom complex that some of us have that we need to identify and be
Yeah.
aware of and mitigate for. So that's definitely one thing. And also the rest of the field kind of trains us to have this scarcity mindset, right? When funders are only giving out 1 year grants that barely covers what we need to do. So we're constantly in this survival mode. So I think we also need to be a lot angrier and more strategic in how we organize. Like we need
Mm.
to start working together to advance legislation, maybe to pack some town halls, to sign petitions, to write op-eds, to really push back on this sort of narrative that we just believe that nonprofit workers should just be impoverished while we're trying to help poor people.
Yeah, and sometimes we're part of that community that we're trying to help because we're not making enough money, which is a big thing too. And I do have a question to ask you about like how do nonprofit like how have you been able to because like I feel like this is therapy. Like how have you been able to prevent yourself from lighting yourself on fire to keep other people warm?
Um, I mean, most of us don't. I mean, the lighting of yourself on fire sounds like very dramatic, but it's not like that. I think it's more like the boil frog thing, right?
Mm,
Where it's
okay.
so gradual that you don't recognize. Like if someone is lighting themselves on fire, they would feel it right away. But if it's so gradual that you don't, I was writing this week about just like the health benefit, like the health deterrent, like how we're being affected negatively, our physical health by doing this work, right? And
Mm.
we don't think about it. We don't think that like day after day, the stress is actually shortening our lifespan. It's causing stress and ulcers and kidney stones and rapid aging. I mean, look at me. I'm only 24. Look at this face. This is It ages you. Doing
You
this
look
work.
great. You look great.
But it's like it's gradual, and you don't think so. Even if you don't plan to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm, you are by the very nature of doing this work, and so you have it's by default you're setting yourself on fire. You just don't
Mm,
realize it. So, and it's not just like the physical health. There's also the mental health aspect of it all. There's also like the financial health. Like
mhm.
many of us don't get paid enough, so we don't think about like retirement. I think I'm just getting freaked out about just the lack of retirement savings in the sector. Like, how are people, leaders in this sector, are going to retire? How, I don't know. We're gonna have to like golden girl some stuff together. Like, I think that's how we're gonna survive. We're gonna exotic marigold hotel some shit. Like, we're just gonna, you know. Like,
Oh, you took it back to their other show. That is real. Like Dorothy and Blanche and Rose may have to live together, which is unfortunate because they do so much work for so many other people. And now, like at the and during their golden years, they can't be comfortable, which isn't okay. Which isn't okay.
yeah, I mean, I do like the aspect of like this sort of village living, right? I think
Yeah.
we should be in community. I think that's probably what's going to save many of us is being in community with one another. I love the idea of the Golden Girls and like a whole bunch of folks, kind of moving into like a commune or a house together and supporting one another. I think that's really great. But we also need to start thinking about like right now, why do we not have the resources to actually pay our team members well so they can take care of themselves, think about retirement, I don't know, go on vacations once in a while, not
Right.
freak out when their car breaks down or their relatives fall ill or something. Like we really need to take care of our people better.
Even just saying that out loud, I have never thought about like after like what happens when you're trying to retire on like a smaller like salary. Are there, have you heard conversations about that? Like, what does that mean? Because there's a whole generation of people who are in their retirement stages right now or about to retire on like the cusp. So, like, what have you heard conversations? Like, are people trying to make change in that or no?
I think we're so focused on survival in the present day that we don't oftentimes think about what does this mean for the future, right? And then we have this sort of mentality in nonprofit that if you go into this line of work, that you this is par for the course, that you would be poor, that you wouldn't have any savings, and I think it is a very destructive mindset. And nonprofit staff deserve better as we go about changing the world. So I think that we have not been having these conversations. We oftentimes joke about it. Like I talk to people about retirement, they're like, "Oh, I got beanie babies," or sometimes it turns really macabre, like, "Oh, I'm just gonna die at 65,"
No.
you know. And then with the way that our health is going, it's not unrealistic to be like, I'm just gonna work myself to death and then just gonna die. That's my retirement saving like plan. That's really terrible. And we need to stop joking about this. I've been encouraging people and I've been encouraging funders to start thinking about the long term, just just planning for our sector. Like they don't think enough about that. We don't really take care of our people very well in this sector oftentimes.
I agree with that. I think it's definitely being kicked down the road, which or kicking the can down the road, as they say. So I'm glad you pointed that out. I feel like there has to be some type of change, and I'm wondering after this conversation if there's maybe because I know you speak on panels and stuff. I'm sure people are hopefully. In my head, even though you call them out, I feel like the donors are like, "Fu, what do you think?" And they're inviting you to the table. Are you being invited to the table by folks to like call out the structure?
Yeah, but I think the issue with our sector, one of the biggest issues is toxic intellectualizing. Like we love talking about
Oh,
stuff, right? We just
that
love
is
it. We love like
yeah.
our theories of change. We love reading white papers and putting sticky dots on on like agenda items. Be like, oh, let's vote on our priorities. Like put your sticky dots on which ones, and then do absolutely nothing with it. Like, you
It's
know,
true.
I
it is.
feel seen. It's
So the
true. There's
funder's always like, "Boo, what do you recommend?" I'm like, "Well, increase your payout rate and give more money to nonprofits so they can fund sabbaticals and pay their staff better." They're like, "Oh yeah, that's a really great idea. We'll think about it for the next 10 years," and they do nothing about it. Like it's very irritating.
I can see that. So you're kind of like, why am I talking if you're not going to actually create any change with it?
I know, and sometimes I feel really
No.
guilty. Like, why am I getting paid to deliver things that have been told to you for years and years now? By people who've burnt out and have left the field. And in Seattle, they become real estate agents for some reason. Like, there's
As their
yeah,
face too. I mean, I get it. Look, you got do what you got to do, but I, even if you're getting paid for it on the side, you're also calling it out and you're also providing a safe space for people to feel like, okay, I can go to you and tell you what my thing is. You can speak for them because you have, I don't know, like I feel like you get a pass. You get a pass to say things like you're talking about power dynamics. Like you've built your platform so much and you have such a huge following that like we expect you to speak your mind and like literally not hold your tongue ever. And we appreciate it. We really do. Like we appreciate it.
well, thank you, Ashley. You know, I do acknowledge, like, I think I have a lot of privilege, right? That
Mhm.
allows me. I think if I were a woman of color, for example, I think it would be much more difficult to deliver the same messages. So my
100%.
male privilege, my ability to speak English, you know, like these are
Mhm.
privileges that I don't take for granted. And I know a lot of people have been saying these things, especially women of color, disabled people, trans people, etc. have been saying a lot of these things for years and years, and oftentimes get punished for it. Right? They lose their
Yeah.
job, they get demoted, ostracized, etc.
So I have two questions for you. One, we're talking about, nonprofit leaders. What would you tell your younger self? Like, as you know, like you've lived it, you felt it, you've been in it. The first when Vu first started working at a nonprofit, what would you be like? A, be aware of this, or like do that. What would your advice be?
One is a friend of mine was talking about how everything is just made up, like like in this sector, like everything is made up. And I wish I had learned this lesson earlier because it took me a
Okay.
few years of like, oh, I must do it this way. This is how boards are run. This is how we do fundraising. This is how you talk to donors. So
That's
that's one thing
true.
I would say is, yeah, know that it's all made up, which means that you can make other stuff up too that are equally valid, right?
Facts.
I
Yeah.
would also say, like, as someone from like a marginalized identity, if you're a person of color, etc., like you have probably way more knowledge and lived experience. That means you're probably the most knowledgeable person in any room that you are in, right? But we have always been trained because of white supremacy and so on and patriarchy that we're like, oh, we need to play it nice and we need to wait our turns and etc. And I would
Mm.
tell my former self, like, no, you are probably the most qualified person to be in that room talking about immigrant issues and equity and all this stuff. And go in there and have the confidence of a lot of these mediocre people who have way less lived experience than you do. Like, jump right in there, like act like you own the room, okay?
Right.
Right? Like, you own this room, or like, be thoughtful because you're on stolen indigenous land. A lot of these people are in these rooms that are on stolen indigenous land. So, like, we got to
Yeah.
question all of these different things as we go about doing this work, you know?
That is real. I mean, you're saying it to your younger self, but you're speaking it to me as well. Like, I think it's really important for us to be a little bit more bold when we're in spaces, even if we're not invited to the room, bring your folding chair or like build your own table aside from that. So I appreciate that. And then I do have another question too. Like, as you mentioned at the beginning, that you've gotten a lot of pushback. Can we talk about that? Like, what type of pushback have you received by being so outspoken?
Honestly, a lot of the funders have been very receptive to my pushback. I mean, of course, they engage in a lot of intellectualizing. They're like, "Oh, we really
Mm.
appreciate your perspective," right? There's only been a couple who are like, "I wish you would propose more solutions." You're always whining about stuff. But no one has
Yeah.
actually stopped like giving my organizations money because of the stuff I said. The major pushback I've been getting is from actually fundraising experts because for a long
Really?
time, yeah, for a long time, because like I'm like, I don't like the way we do fundraising. We need to talk to our donors about racism and reparation and slavery and stolen indigenous land, etc., and paying more taxes. Like, we need to talk to our donors about that, you know. But the
Yeah.
fundraising experts over the past several decades have been training everyone to be like, no, you need to treat donors like heroes. They should be put on pedestals. You need to wash their feet because they are the best people among us. Look at how generous they are giving all this money. Like, we couldn't do this work without them. And you got to make sure you use the word "you" at least 40 times in every appeal letter when you're asking for money, etc. Make them feel like heroes. Like, it's really kind of sickening, right?
Oh,
So when I'm
wow.
like, actually, no, stop doing that, okay? Like, we need to be partners, like actual partners with our donors and funders. And if you're an actual partner, then you have honest conversations. You're not just chasing them around, telling them that they're right all the time. That's not a partnership. And so I get a lot of pushback from these fundraising experts who are just like, "Don't listen to Vu," like "woke is broke." One of them said.
What? I mean, I am not surprised by that comment because there's a whole anti-woke movement type thing, but we have to push, especially those from marginalized communities, we have to speak up. Like we continue have to continue to speak up. And like, what do you say when people are like, woke is broke, don't be woke, like anti whatever group?
Yeah, well, I'm like, this is the entire reason our sector exists, is to create equity, right? Is to advance social justice. So if you're not thinking about like the dynamics, racial dynamics, for example, then you're not doing this work effectively. Like look at the donors and funders. Most of them are white, right? And the people
Yeah.
most
Yeah.
affected by systemic injustice are going to be people of color, disabled people, trans people, LGBTQIA folks, right? Older adults, lower income people. And so if you don't think about if you don't think about these dynamics, then I don't think you can be effective at your work. So a lot of these fundraising experts who are like 98% white,
Mhm.
and the donors who are 95% white, and foundation program officers and board trustees, they are again also 95% white. So if they don't stop to examine like why this is very strange, and then we are expected to kind of constantly suck up to them, defer to their wishes and their whims, that is in many ways perpetuating the very injustices that we're raising money to fight in the first place.
I mean, you might as well drop the mic after that because that's real. And I mean, obviously you're not working in like the DEI, like internal folks who need to hire certain types of people, but why do you feel like it's so non-diverse? Like those who are giving the money do not look like the people they're giving the money to.
Because I think people, a lot of times people mean well, but they don't realize that what we should be doing is focusing on creating a world where none of us are needed in the nonprofit sector. Like few of us, right? We can just
Mhm.
all close up shop because society is taking care of its people, and government is doing its work and is representative of of communities, and people are paying their fair share of taxes. And then many of us, like homeless shelters and food pantries, can just go out of business, and many of us can just like retire from doing this work and become wedding singers, or whatever it is that we dream about, right? But instead our sector becomes this sort of hobby for a lot of people. It becomes a hobby, right? And we become
Yeah.
like this sky mall catalog of like various different causes that people can like pick and choose from based on their whims and their desires. So people are like
Yeah.
flipping through this catalog, like the nonprofit catalog, and they're like, "Oh, I love horses. Let me donate to this horse therapy program. Oh, I love kids. Let me donate to this preschool
That's true.
program." Whatever. Instead of thinking like, why do we even have this catalog in the first place? You know? And
Right.
so I think that's what causes a lot of these issues, that people are thinking, and we also reinforce this idea that what we're doing is like a hobby for people.
I do have a question though about you're talking about educating your stakeholders. Like, how can nonprofits educate their stakeholders? Like, I do not want to put the onus on, especially historically marginalized communities, communities of color, as you're talking about the LGBTQ plus community. But unfortunately, we still have to do some of this work because we're not the ones who have the coins. So, how can nonprofits educate their stakeholders about complex social issues without alienating parts of their audience, or also just taking on all like lighting themselves on fire, basically, just to like explain certain things to them?
Well, I think one is that we have to get out of this mindset of donors as heroes, right? And into the mindset
Hmm.
of everything is on fire, and we're all doing our best, various different roles to put them out, right?
Right.
So donors play an important part, but they are not like heroes. Like none of us are heroes. We're just trying to make sure that our community is safe and vibrant. Like, and we should do our part. That's what we should be doing. So getting out of these mindsets that have been ingrained in us is going to be very important. Like the mindset that like you shouldn't have talk to your donors about difficult things because it'll make them scared and they'll stop donating, right? Because that mindset prevents us from talking to them about things like reparation and
Right.
taxes. So get out of that fear mentality, and it's going to take a while to decondition ourselves from that because it's been so ingrained through decades of fundraising pedagogy, right? So that's one thing, and then start by like have these invitations to people, create opportunities, and maybe you don't necessarily go to your biggest donor and be like, hey, do some reparation and return stolen indigenous land, right?
Yeah.
But you can actually invite them to have a conversation, be like, hey, we are talking about wealth disparity this month, and we're having a discussion on that. We would love for our donors to join us. One organization over here, they sent a copy of Ijeoma Uluo's book, So You Want to Talk About Race, to their major donors and
Nice.
invited them to have a conversation about the book, right? And of course, some of the donors probably freaked out, but a lot of the donors appreciated the invitation. So we need to start creating more of these opportunities instead of assuming that our donors don't want to be involved. I had one major donor who told me, Vu, you've been sending all these handwritten thank you notes. That's really great. We send a lot of handwritten thank you notes in the sector, right? And
Yeah.
he's like, but I don't need any more handwritten thank you notes. Like I want to be more engaged with the work. And I said, okay, well, what are you thinking? And he said, well, I heard that you're attending this 2-day undoing institutional racism training. Do you mind if I attend with you and the team? And I said, yeah, if you can pay for this, and you can take two days off, then absolutely come join us. He was like this sort of wealthy white man,
Yeah.
and he attended this 2-day undoing racism training with me and the staff. And after a couple days, after the training, I checked in with him and I said, "Hey, how was that?" He was like, "That was probably the most like one of the most brutal, painful things I've had to go through," and I appreciated it so much because I learned so much, and I felt closer to you and the rest of the team, and I have a better understanding of what you're trying to do. Like we don't trust our donors enough. We treat them like toddlers, really.
That's
We
true.
infantilize them quite a bit. And I think we need to stop underestimating their ability to have meaningful conversations and engagement.
I love that how you call them in instead of like assuming. I agree. I think we need to be okay with having those uncomfortable conversations with the donors because they could actually I'm sure he gave y'all more money because now he gets it and he was excited about doing the work, which is great. And I want to ask you this too. And this is something that you and me are aligned on. And but like I know this has been something that's been very unfortunately, and it shouldn't be controversial.
Is it the
In the
Oxford
pay-
comma? Because yeah, it should not be controversial. Everyone needs to use the
I
Oxford comma.
yes, it's part of the outdoor comment, but in reality, I mean, not to be political, but whatever, like with a lowercase p, like you were one of the first people or like big top people that I saw that spoke up about what was happening in Palestine and with like the Hamas and Israel thing. And like you sent this really beautiful written blog post talking about it. And for those who want to read it, it was like our sector's role in calling for peace and justice in Israel and Palestine. But you were also really pushing, saying like, with my platform comes responsibility of using and speaking up for injustice. And ever since then, you've been very good about speaking up about what's happening to the Palestinian people. Again, also talking about anti-Semitism and like talking about all those other parts of that, which is important for us to acknowledge all sides of what's happening. But there have been a lot of other organizations that have been saying they're fighting for injustice. They're all about racial and health equity and whatever was happening. But what's happening in Gaza is obviously all those things are being touched. And so I wanted to ask this. What are some of the difficulties you face in voicing your support for Palestine within the nonprofit sector? And have you experienced any backlash? And if so, what kind?
Yeah, it has been it's been a challenging few months, right? And I have been getting a ton of flack because I've been saying this is a genocide. It's
Mhm.
Israel is committing genocide against Palestinians, and just the murder and the massacres of like 15,000 children is unconscionable, and a lot of people are supporting that.
Mhm.
And it has been awful just dealing with people who just cannot understand that it doesn't matter what, like, you just, it doesn't matter what it is, like, you just don't murder children. You don't
Right.
murder civilians, whether they're Israeli children or Palestinian children, you don't murder them. And to do so deliberately, that is genocide. And we need to do a much better job calling it out, and especially as our sector is supposed to be advancing equity and justice. And I've been very disappointed by the silence of people, but not just the silence of, but the people who try to silence those of us who are calling out this genocide. So I've been
Yeah.
getting tons of just emails, messages across every single social media platform, just calling me anti-Semitic, calling me a Nazi, um,
Oh.
calling me a supporter of baby murders, and it has like pro Hamas, calling me a terrorist and stuff like that. All because I'm like, we should not be supporting the murder, and we should not be using our tax dollars, billions of dollars of our tax money, to fund bombs that are being dropped on Palestinian civilians, children, and you know, just it's awful. So I have been disappointed. It's tapered down a bit, but yeah, in during this process, I have lost speaking engagements,
Mm.
keynotes. I've lost a few friends. I've lost like probably a quarter of my followers. I point this out because, um, like I have the privilege to absorb a lot of this flack, whereas other people, I know so many of colleagues who have, lost jobs or have
Hmm.
been ostracized at their workplaces for showing support for Palestine. And it's, so I am relatively doing okay, and I think we need to really focus because the genocide is still ongoing. And those of
Yeah.
us who do have platforms need to be using it and need to be taking the flack. And I'm okay with it. I'm okay with all of it because like this is what our field should be about.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you 100% on that. We should be leaning towards humanity versus, yeah, no, I agree with you. You have the lived experience about what's happening and what, losing speaking engagements and whatnot. What advice do you have for other nonprofits or those who are working for nonprofits or even for corporations and whatnot who want to speak up but are scared of the repercussions? What advice do you have for them?
There's strength in numbers. So like go
Hmm.
to the rallies and join support groups and help donate to organizations. But I think at the end of the day, those of us who have privilege, and most of us who are here in the United States have way more privilege than people in Palestine right now, right?
Hmm.
And we're at this crossroad where we have to figure out like what is our moral stance here? What are we willing to give up in order to advance a just and equitable world? And of course, it's not always so easy because we have families to support, we have children to that we need to take care of, and so on, right?
Hmm.
Um, but those of us who can, we need to be able to speak up, and that means we got to figure out what are we willing to lose, and also what are we willing to do to support other people. Again, this sort of the sense of community is what we rely on, and we need to support one another. So I would say that as people lose their jobs and so on, like the community needs to rally and support folks who are losing their jobs, who are getting ostracized because they're speaking up for Palestine, and that's what we can do for one another in this moment.
And then my other question for you is, what does equity mean to you in the philanthropic and nonprofit sector?
Yeah, because of toxic intellectualizing, we spend a lot of time like defining equity and so on. I
Hmm.
think the definition is simple for me. I think equity is about restoring power and resources to the communities that are most affected by systemic injustice, right? And the systemic injustice that have been specifically caused by white supremacy and patriarchy and colonization and slavery and stolen indigenous land. So that's what equity is. If you're not restoring power and resources to those communities, then you're not doing equity.
I agree. I agree. Go ahead and drop the mic with that one. That's a really good answer. Switching gears, I do want to ask you, can you talk about your new initiative? Because I know you have this like crappy funding practices initiative, and then also you have your community-centric fundraising. Like you've started that. So then there's two different initiatives, but can you tell us about those?
Yeah, community-centric fundraising, you and I touched on it a bit, which is like really grounding the work in racial and economic justice, grounding the fundraising work.
Yeah.
And so that means, again, talking to our donors about challenging subjects such as reparation and taxes and returning stolen indigenous land, and also ending this Hunger Games that we play with one another. So
Mhm.
community-centric fundraising is really about nonprofits supporting one another, and that means sometimes turning down funding. Like if your organization is doing really well and you don't really need to start applying for all sorts of funds all the time, maybe don't apply for this grant. Maybe help another nonprofit get that grant instead. So getting out of this mindset that of survival and protecting your own organization at all costs, like that's what community centric fundraising is about, along with like talking to our donors about like difficult subjects. Crappy funding practices is about calling out foundations specifically who do just really crappy things and calling them out publicly by name, because this we don't do enough of that, right? We say things in general, and I do that. I'm like, hey, foundations, you need to like do this and this better. But after years and years of that, I just got kind of tired. And I think the field is getting tired of just being very nice. And now we have a movement of calling out funders by name. Like, for example, last week there was a funder who requires their grantees to submit a notarized report every 60 days. So you get a
60
grant from them
days.
every 60 days.
Wow.
Every 60 days, you get this grant from them, which is, I don't know how much it was, probably $40,000. I don't know how much it is. But you get this money every 60 days, you have to provide a report and it needs to be notarized. And yeah, so we called them out. It was like, what the hell are you doing? Who has time for this? What does this accomplish at all? You know, we've actually had other
Right.
funders who do like things such as, well, we're going to only accept the first 150 grant applications that we receive. And so they opened it at like 9 a.m. By 9:02 a.m., 150 applications, and then they got to shut it down. And now, so like hundreds of other nonprofit leaders have wasted all their time writing this grant that will never be read. So like 30 or 40 hours just gone down the drain for each of these nonprofits because they were there at 9:04 instead of 9:02. Like how ridiculous is that?
That
Right?
is ridiculous.
Yeah, so we got to call them out because we don't have time for this. Like we're trying to put out fires. And so yeah, we call them out by name publicly and shaming them. And I think we need to start using public shame more often.
Okay. So where can people find the crappy funding practices? Like, how can they sign up and how can they submit and how can they also read the tea?
Right now it's on linkedin.com. There's a great group of volunteers behind all of this, doing all the research and the call outs. But you can also join and be involved. And now it's been like over this, like nearly 14,000 people have signed up to follow this in the last couple of months. And so it's pretty
Okay.
active in calling out people. And now we're looking for more volunteers because it's a lot of work and it's all volunteer run.
So if people want to volunteer, how can they do that?
Yeah, you can also go to the LinkedIn. There should be some details there. Or you can just go to my blog, nonprofitaf.com, and the latest blog post down at the bottom, there should be like a link for next month's meeting where you can join and learn more about what we're doing. I love our sector and I
Yeah.
think I believe in it. And I always think that it's like, I would say that it's like air. Our sector is like air. Nonprofits are like air. People do not appreciate air until they need it, until it's like gone and it's not there anymore,
Yeah.
right? Whereas other sectors are like food. People can see food, so they appreciate it. They take pictures of food, but air is just as important. We just don't appreciate it. And I think that's what the sector is. And because of the invisibleness of our sector, we don't take care of our people very well. We don't get the funding and resources that we need. And as much as I love our sector and strongly believe in it, I really hope that we get to solve some of these issues by being louder and organizing better and demanding the resources that we need to take care of our people better.
Legit. I agree. I agree. Boo, this has been such a pleasure. I appreciate you being on the show. Honestly, the nuggets of truth that you have shared with us. I hope that resonates with as many people as it resonated with me. We appreciate you. Thank you for all that you do. I hope you're getting your flowers because you are doing a lot of an amazing work for the sector. Even if you're getting the backlash, you're like, I don't know, you're like hitting them left and right and you're doing an amazing job. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being
Thank
on
you,
the show.
Ash. Absolutely.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you all for checking out the Heart of Health Equity. This has been Boo Lay and Ashley Rodgers, and we will see you later. All right, bye.